Good morning. Happy January. Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. You're going to love today's chat. We are going into our Tier 1 coaching series for the second time. And today we're going to be talking about faculty commitment and lesson planning. And leading the chat today, we have Christy Gomez, Lauren Kowalski, and Sabrina Stewart. So I'm going to hand it over to them to get us started.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Kowalski. And as she said, today is part two of our Tier 1 coaching series. So as we are letting everyone in, we're going to start with probably the most important thing on people's minds. Um, and that would be the Super Bowl, right? So what is the thing that you are most looking forward to in the Super Bowl? So as you're kind of hopping in the chat, you can introduce yourself in the chat and then let us know. Is it the actual game, the football itself? Are you just here for the snacks, like me? The entertainment, right? Looking at that halftime show this year, the commercials, or are you just ready for the Super Bowl to be over because you don't really care about football and everyone talking about it and you want to move on to the Olympics, which are going to be right after that? So go ahead and put that in the chat for us. And then Christy or Sabrina, if either of you want to kind of jump in and see which one's winning.
Well, it looks like snacks are popular. Some said all of the above. Also, definitely the football. So there's a variety, but I would say snacks are in the lead at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, snacks are probably the top of my list, but that's for all things. Like that's not just the Super Bowl. I think snacks should be, a lot more acceptable all day long. All right, so it looks like we have most people in and everyone's kind of gotten a chance to quickly introduce themselves. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. As Betsy shared, this is part two of our three-part Tier 1 coaching series. So in September, Sabrina and I presented on teaming and attendance integration. And if you were not able to join us for that one, they are always posted online through our website. Today, we're looking at faculty commitment and lesson planning. And hopefully you can join us again next month where we're going to be looking at how we can use data to support the implementation of disciplinary procedures and that foundational PBIS system. Our objectives for today are that we're going to discuss the role that your faculty and staff play in your PBIS implementation, and especially how we can increase the commitment from staff by including them in some of the problem solving happening at Tier 1. We're going to do a very quick review of the 5 essentials for PBIS implementation. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the time, Christy's really going to be sharing with you how we can be teaching the core behavior curriculum and then creating lesson plans for teaching behavior specifically to increase the school-wide fidelity of PBIS. As a reminder, right, we focus on the 10 critical elements when implementing PBIS, and today's chat is really going to focus on 3 specific ones. So faculty commitment, classroom systems, and then lesson plans for teaching behavior. So looking right at our faculty commitment piece, we want to remember that we want to always include all stakeholder voices, even though today we're really targeting faculty and staff. All stakeholders include your families, your community, your teachers, your students. So before we jump in, you can either unmute yourself and share with us, or you can put in the chat, why is it important to seek and include stakeholder voice? Let's make sure we know the why of what we're doing. So go ahead and type it in, or feel free to unmute and jump in.
Yes, Beth has highlighted having a varied perspective leads to an inclusive response.
Yep, definitely want to get multiple perspectives for sure.
Yes, and also to build buy-in. Rebecca pointed out it's important for building buy-in. And Stephen also shared that stakeholder inclusion is important because not one of us is smarter than all of us. So again, getting perspectives.
I love that. That's such a great reminder. Not one of us is smarter than all of us.
And yes, when stakeholders help build in, you already have buy-in.
So true. So, Sabrina, if you can keep an eye on that for us, and if any other ideas are shared, you can jump in and let us know. Um,
Absolutely.
so, so we want to think of what it means to include stakeholder voice, right? So that's our collaboratively planning and implementing with all, right? So staff, students, families, community members, is the what of stakeholder voice, and then some reasons why we do it. Of course, to ensure that it's relevant, right, for all of the stakeholder needs, we want to create and maintain those ongoing partnerships, something that was mentioned in the chat, right? Having that joint voice and shared value. A big focus that we're going to look at today is this piece here, increasing ownership, right? If we are involved in the process, if we have ownership in the process, it's going to increase the engagement of all of the stakeholders and their support of the implementation. So another one mentioned in the chat, new ideas and viewpoints. And then, of course, our overall goal, right? Always to improve student outcomes, maintain fidelity, and then build positive relationships, um, is why we really want to include that stakeholder voice. We know that our faculty and staff are the foundation, right? Not just of PBIS, but really of everything that happens at our schools. So if you look at the little people pyramid up in the corner there, you can imagine that as being your faculty and staff, right? Together, right? They're building that pyramid, working as a team. The pyramid's really strong when everybody is involved. If the one staff member there, maybe in the yellow shirt on that bottom row, if she were to decide, you know what, I don't really think I'm going to participate in PBIS. I'm going to have my own expectations for students. I'm going to do my own thing in my classroom. And she steps out of the pyramid, it might not collapse right away, right? The two gentlemen next to her could kind of slide over and try to support that side, but it's definitely going to be weakened, right? And when the weakness starts, then maybe it might crack and then fall down on that side. And then slowly it will deteriorate. So we want to make sure that every adult on campus is included and knows that they are an important stakeholder in the process. Our faculty are also the ones who do a lot of the work, right? They're the boots on the ground. They're teaching, modeling, reinforcing all of the school-wide expectations. They're the ones we rely on to collect and record the discipline data, our ODRs, our notes, our surveys, and hopefully recording them accurately and consistently. They're the ones that are reteaching expectations, and that's any staff member, right, on campus could be reteaching those expectations from the cafeteria to the playground to the buses to the classroom. We also rely on our faculty to acknowledge the appropriate behavior and usually provide or supervise the rewards and incentives that are done school-wide. So they're the ones that are running the bingo games. They're the ones that are providing the extra recess. They're the ones that are doing maybe collecting classroom tickets or giving them out. So we really need to make sure that they're invested because they are a huge piece of the system. The part that we want to have more involvement in with our stakeholders and specifically faculty and staff is this problem solving. So a lot of schools and PBIS teams are good at the parts that we've already referenced, the teaching, the reteaching, the rewarding, but they're not necessarily always involving the faculty and staff in the problem solving. The tier one team tends to do that. And we want to make sure the outreach is further so that we can help build some of that ownership. So commitment is going to be key. There is a handout there. The handouts are all, I believe, being put in the chat for you. So it's linked for you in the handouts, the strategies for obtaining and maintaining staff buy-in. So a lot of great ideas that you could use for maintaining staff buy-in. And again, as we said, involvement increases ownership. So if you make me a part of something, then I am going to want to participate in it more and support it more. Getting their feedback through surveys, maybe emails, maybe informal meetings is really going to be key. And then a big part here that we're going to take a moment to kind of pause on for a second is recognizing the staff members who engage, right? who is not only showing the expectations themselves, but teaching them, reteaching them. You can see the systems in their class, and then developing a system for the students to also potentially recognize them. So it should work both ways, that if you have a staff member, say, who is being responsible, right? Be responsible is one of your school-wide expectations. You have a staff member who's demonstrating responsibility. I think to my elementary days in the classroom, we would often get emails of teachers, please remember to pick your students up on time from the cafeteria because the next classes are coming in, right? We probably got that weekly. I might have been one of the people that that email was targeted to, but I worked on it for sure. Lunch goes by so fast, right? So the teachers that were on time, right? That's a great opportunity. Hey, thank you so much, Mrs. Smith, for being on time to pick up your students from class. Here's a, dolphin dollar for you that maybe she could turn in for a Diet Coke or like a preferred parking spot. Maybe they're always at their duty post on time or just every day. They don't need to be reminded of what their duty is. So recognizing them, the students will then see the teachers not only modeling the expectations, but also being rewarded for modeling the expectations. So we're going to take a minute to answer in the chat here. What are some ways that you're already doing the recognition side for your faculty and staff? So let's throw out some ideas so we can quickly share them. And you can also just unmute yourself and jump in if you want, if it's faster. It's a quicker one right now.
Okay, shout outs in weekly newsletters.
I see
That's
shout
a
outs
great
too
way.
yeah, I see them on the like the car line, like those rolling boards. I see a lot of shout outs there too.
Hey, Lauren,
Yeah.
this is Carrie from Highlands.
Hi, Carrie.
One of our schools, when they do their Student of the Months, they relate the Student of the Month to the resiliency characteristics through Florida. And then
Mhm.
that student picks the staff member that they feel is part of that as well. So it's kind of neat how they're recognizing through those characteristics and traits, which can tie back into their expectations.
Yeah, I love that. I've seen
Love
schools
that.
like my son's school is doing where they recognize student of the month and teacher of the month, but it's still like staff picked. I love that the students then get to pick the staff member that should like be recognized with them. Thank you so much, Carrie.
And Deborah shared that they have a tropical palm tree form to thank an individual for something. And then once a month, a winner is drawn for a prize. And there's also mention of a token system for teachers. Stephen mentioned that they nominate, they're to be nominated for Teacher of the Month. They have a token system. And then Rebecca also shared that one of the high schools has set up a QR code throughout the school that students or staff can scan to submit a shout out for staff. And that seems like a great way to just tie in what students are already doing in terms of their accessing social media and using QR codes.
Yeah,
And hopefully you get a really high response rate doing it that way. That's
I
awesome.
know. I love that. What a great idea, especially for the high school students, because they are definitely going to look for opportunities to use use their phone, and they're more likely to participate when it's quick and easy. Like that's meeting them where they're at. I know one school that I worked at, just to share a few more ideas really quick. They gave us a Get Out of the Grove free card. So like that's how admin would acknowledge staff for modeling expectations, and um, you could leave right after the buses left if you turned in your card that day. So it's like a little kind of like comp time sort of thing. And then Sabrina, any others pop up?
Yes. Shayna mentioned recognizing and announcing teachers that are consistent with cell phone expectations. So kind of tying it back to the use of cell phones. And then Shonda mentioned the school, her school has a ROAR system and students earn bucks, which they can use to buy items needed or passes for fun activities. Yeah, passes are great because often those are free 99. It doesn't necessarily cost you anything. You can tie it
Mhm.
to some type of social activity or just something fun. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
sharing.
Yeah, and please keep the ideas coming. We want people to leave with not only new information, but also maybe some new ideas. So please keep putting them in the chat. So we kind of looked at some things that we're already doing, right? The recognition piece, it does seem like a lot of schools and districts are getting the recognition even for staff included. We want to look more at the next piece is really making sure that we're sharing the data specifically to be involving our staff in the problem solving part of tier one. Problem solving doesn't have to just be all solely on the shoulders of the tier one team, right? It should be shared among the whole faculty, especially when it's a tier one issue that they might be looking at. So first, just some ways that you could be sharing school-wide data. Ideally, monthly at minimum, all staff should be seeing the school-wide data. That can be done through staff meetings, maybe your professional learning communities. Some schools and districts do kid talks or child talks, newsletters, email, another way to make sure that it's always being shared. And then there's two examples there of some newsletters, one in the red there, and then one of the larger ones on the other side. We're going to talk about that larger one in just a second. So what we want to be sure is that you're not just sending out the newsletter or just sending out the email. You're also incorporating opportunities for the staff to have input on that data that's being shared and then take some ownership in how we can work to improve any data or discipline issues that we might notice are arising. So I know the text is really small, and if you have your copy yourself, you can kind of look at it a little closer, but I really like the one larger newsletter example that's highlighted there because if you can see it, what they're doing is kind of twofold. Yes, they're sharing the data. So they have in the middle, like the number of incidents that are there for the school year, what the most common incidents are. Then they break down the data by referrals and the different types of referrals. But up at the top in that little box, they are not only highlighting, what for this week coming up, but what PBIS expectation everyone's going to be modeling that week. So we're going to be looking specifically at making good choices. So our teachers should be talking about making good choices. We should be rewarding students who are making good choices. And they're specifically targeting the behavior of skipping. So when we're making good choices, we're in class, on time, seated with our supplies out when the bell rings. And then that's there as the action of the week. So the whole staff school-wide is going to be making sure that that's the message that's being sent and rewarded by its students. In the
And Kat
middle,
shared,
go ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please jump in.
Okay, and Kat shared that even posting data in the break room with questions for food for thought or opportunities to provide input on poster paper was a nice informal way to share data at a secondary campus.
Yep, if that's the mailroom, right? Everybody usually visits the mailroom or the staff lounge, right? Having some things up there with some post-its, right, for quick, easy input, is a very easy way to gain that information. So the graph that you see in the middle, right, is just a common discipline graph that many schools are sharing with their staff, and this is where the incidents are happening by location. So ideally, this is getting shared monthly. What we see in this graph, again, I know the text is really small, is that the classroom is where the majority of the incidents are happening. So as a reminder, right, if more than 50% of your referrals are coming from the classroom, it indicates a tier one classroom problem that could be worked through and problem solved with your school. So we're going to kind of hold on to that for a moment and look at some other examples of data sharing, and then we're going to start connecting that specific graph to how we can move forward and plan our lessons accordingly. When sharing data, it doesn't have to just be behavior, right? Attendance data can also be shared. And we want to make sure that we're sharing it in an impactful way. So what we often see is that first attendance data chart commonly shared among the school. Here's our absences by month. And a lot of people would get this chart maybe in an email. They'd be like, wow, like look at February. Like we knew it was going to be bad, but that's a lot of days. And April and May, we knew that those were going to be high because it's the end of the year. And then they would kind of close the email and move on. But they chose to, at this school, break it down and kind of make the data a little more impactful So there was more of a faculty response, and then the faculty were really invested in helping to problem solve the attendance issue at this school. 6,785 whole days of school were missed, right? 14% of the students were chronically absent. They broke it down even further to say that's 47,000 hours of school, 5.5 years of instruction. When data is shared like that in multiple varieties, right, that response rate is higher. Now those teachers are going to pause at that email and be invested in the staff meeting or the problem solving chat. Hey, what can we do to help get our attendance numbers better? So again, we were talking about sharing discipline data, looking at location. We saw that classroom was going to be a focus. That's where most of the referrals were coming from. So then we're going to look at the incidents. So the most common incidents are horseplay, classroom disruption, and open defiance. All three of these make sense, fit within the classroom. Most likely that's where the behaviors are happening. So we've identified the location. We've identified some tier one types of behaviors that we want to target and involve our faculty and staff in problem solving. So now we're going to be able to take it from this piece to layer in the problem solving parts and then the implementation within the classroom. So Christy, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Lauren. And one of the things that I heard when I was a DC is if you are not seeing PBIS in the classroom, can you really call yourself a PBIS school? And that really hit me when I was a DC, and it really made me start to dig in more of we're not just talking about PBIS in the common areas, but how does it fit into the classroom as well? So what we're going to look at now, just very quickly, are the PBIS 5 essentials to help bring PBIS in the classroom. What does that look like in those classroom systems? And on the left-hand side there, you'll see our wheel that has all of those listed. The first one being maximizing structure. The second one being teaching our expectations and rules, engaging our students, acknowledging appropriate behavior, and responding to inappropriate behavior when necessary. And we want to take all of those and tie those into our tier one expectations for the school. Those apply, remember, if they're school-wide, they apply to all adults, all people on campus in every location. That applies to all classrooms as well. And we take those tier one expectations and we bring those into the classroom, breaking them into classroom expectations. And just like with our school-wide expectations, we want to make sure that they're very easily posted so that they can be very easily referenced. We want to make sure that they are directly and explicitly taught and defined. And we want to make sure that we are embedding them into academics and conversations as frequently as possible. With our school-wide expectations, remember those apply to all classrooms. They're posted in all classrooms. They should be clearly visible. But we want to take those just like we have on our behavior teaching matrix, and we have laid out the rules by location school-wide, such as our courtyard, our hallways, our cafeteria. Now we're going to explicitly define them and make them operational in the classroom. So our classroom rules, we want to make sure are aligned with our tier one expectations, such as respectful, responsible, and safe. We're going to define those as to what those look like in the classroom. We want to make sure that they are 3 to 5 positively stated, so we're not overwhelming our students with these rules. We want to make sure they're observable and they're measurable. Did I keep my hands and feet to myself? Did I not keep my hands and feet to myself? And we want to make sure that those are developed with student input. Now, I say that knowing full well when I was in the classroom as a teacher, I knew going into the conversation what I wanted my classroom rules to be, and I would guide the conversation. And I would sometimes so if I'm hearing correctly, this is what I think you're saying, and I could guide it, but I still gave the students voice, and we still came to those rules together through conversation. If we start to notice that we are setting rules and they are maybe more than 3 to 5 in number, that should be an example to us that maybe we need instead a classroom routine. Those are still going to be explicitly defined, and they're going to hopefully be developed for activities where problem behaviors are occurring. That very frequently means where there's a traffic area in the classroom. For example, entering the classroom, sharpening my pencil, turning in work. How do I find out what my assignments were when I was absent, when I had the flu, like everybody in Northeast Florida seems to have right now? So we want to make sure that we are just explicitly defining and teaching those classroom routines as well as those classroom rules. One of the tools that we wanted to highlight on the next slide is the Classroom Assistance Tool. This is a phenomenal coaching tool that can be accessed through our website. It is linked there at the bottom of the slide. But I wanted to point out how this could also be not only a coaching tool, but a self-observation. If you are a teacher in our chat and you're listening and you want to know how can I maybe increase my own practice? This is one of those things that you could look at and kind of gauge. How am I when it comes to these fidelity indicators of curriculum and instruction and engaging students in my classroom setting? Our next thing that we are going to talk about are our lesson plans for teaching behavior. And this is one area when I was not only a classroom teacher, but as a DC, this was something that was a little more vague to my school teams. So we wanted to dig into this a little bit more. When we say developing those lesson plans for teaching behavior, just like we have civic standards, math standards, reading standards, we need to have common standards for teaching behavior as well. It doesn't mean that that's all you can teach. That means that this is the bare minimum that every student is going to receive on campus. And your school PBIS team is going to be crucial to deciding what those common standards are for your school campus. Those should be based on data and those should be based on stakeholder feedback. Very frequently, this process includes clarifying conduct definitions, developing universal across your campus lesson plans, and creating a continuum of response. Some of the things that may show up in a behavior teaching matrix. It might be the anchor charts that you see around campus that are defining the school-wide expectations and location rules that are the anchor charts in those locations. It might also be your discipline flow chart, which talks about what interventions should be utilized with students, what behaviors are teacher handled, what behaviors are office handled. But when these issues arise, we should be asking when we're looking at our data, such as we'll talk about in just a second, like Lauren was mentioned before, what is the situationally inappropriate behavior that's occurring? Why is it occurring? What is the missing skill? And how can we teach that missing skill? So in the chat box, if you could, or even I think it's a reaction tool down at the bottom of your screen there, if you have on your school campus those common lesson plans to teach behavior, give us a thumbs up. If that's an opportunity for your school and it's something that needs to be on your action plan, give us a thumbs down just so we can do a quick poll to see where we are.
We have a thumbs up so far. Okay, more thumbs ups. Yay.
Yay.
Love to see that.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you for
So it
that
seems as
feedback.
though, yes, thank you for the feedback. And it seems as though we're not building from scratch. So even if your school has those common lesson plans that every teacher on campus is teaching to every student, then go into this next section thinking of how can we review those. So maybe we are making sure that we are using our ABCs of our basic, our our basic behavior ABCs and defining those effective instruction. We want to make sure that we are preventing the likelihood of that problems will occur. By doing that, we take data and we determine what those frequent behaviors are so that we can prevent them when absolutely every chance we get. And we want to make sure that we know what the expectation or the behavior skill that is not being met is. We want to teach it and model it. And we also want to make sure that we are reinforcing the proper behavior, but we want to make sure we are taking stock of how we are currently responding. That will tell us if our current responses are effective and we need to increase those or continue those. Or we may actually see that we are reinforcing the problem behavior and we may want to delete some of those frequent consequences and so that we're not reinforcing the wrong thing.
Right, Christy, I see a lot of times thinking of the skipping example that was brought up in the one newsletter. Frequently, skipping is met with the consequence of suspension or in-school suspension. And usually, why are students skipping? Well, maybe they can't do the work, so they're trying to avoid the academic demands, and we're kind of reinforcing that behavior if we then remove them from the classroom as their consequence. So trying to make sure that we are, um, matching, right, the behavior that we're seeing with appropriate consequences.
Absolutely. We're going to dig into now some of the how would you do that? And using the example that Lauren used before, the school team, they looked at their school data. They saw that exponentially office discipline referrals were coming from the classroom. Then they started looking at what types of referrals are coming from the classroom. And they identified that by quite a long shot, horseplay was the number one reason for an office discipline referral. So then the school team took it a step further. After they identified horseplay, on the next slide, you'll see they showed their staff in our, can you advance
Sorry.
the slide for me? It's okay. They pulled from the student code of conduct and they explicitly defined in this district, how does our district define horseplay? So they pulled the definition, engaging in rowdy, rough behavior that interferes with the safe or purposeful order of a school, which is a perfectly acceptable definition. How do I make that make sense to students? So then they had to take it a step further because there's a lot of room for interpretation when you're talking about rowdy or rough. And so that's going to come back to what does it look like on our school campus, where I'm not only taking what I think the definition is, but I'm also looking at how that is a part of our school community. So some of the conversation became, what are some examples of horseplay that would be handled in the classroom? That might be play fighting, throwing or grabbing objects, or I know I never heard in my junior high seventh grade classroom, well, it was just a joke. I didn't mean it that way. It was just a joke. Can't you take a joke? And on the other side of that, they defined what could be an office referral for horseplay. Maybe it results in injury to another person. Maybe the student failed to stop once they were given a verbal command to stop, or it included obscene or vulgar language. So in the chat box, if you could share your ideas and pick one side or the other and let us know what would be, if you were having this conversation, what would be a classroom handled example of horseplay, or what might be an office handled example of horseplay. I know everyone is furiously typing.
I was like, you can also just jump in if it's easier
Yes,
than
if it's
typing it
easier to
out. Feel free to
unmute.
unmute yourself and jump in.
Okay, Beth has shared classroom sillies versus someone who was injured or if it escalated, to a real fight.
Absolutely.
And then as far as a classroom behavior, not staying in the assigned area or shouting out might also be considered a behavior that could be handled in the classroom associated with horseplay. Uh, Rebecca identified chasing someone around the classroom versus chasing someone out of their assigned area. Um, Shayna also mentioned throwing items as a possible office referral because it might result in damaging school property while engaging in horseplay.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing. Those are all good examples. And I think part of what you will see is that as you open this up, every single person brings their own definition. That's why it is so important that as a school community, you come together to be explicit about this is our definition as a Lakeside Gator or as a Fleming Island Eagle or whatever the case may be. This is how we are going to define it, and this is how we as a staff agree to handle it in the classroom. These are examples, and these are examples of when we're going to let an administrator handle it. So
And
from
we have a
there,
couple more examples that were shared. Stephen mentioned singing in the classroom as a classroom handle one. That's not one that we might necessarily, think of right away as a behavior that we would have to address, but that could absolutely be disruptive to the learning environment, and they could, interpret that as a joke, right? And so also, Deborah identified hitting another student or attempting to elope. Those may be office managed. And then also just the refusal to stop the disruption after being asked to do so.
and thank you. Thank you for sharing. And so once we have those conversations with staff and we get that feedback, we get those examples, then we are going to start to hone that in, and we're going to develop a universal lesson for our campus. And I just saw something pop up. My students sometimes sing to themselves when I sometimes sing to myself. So I would need to know what that definition is as well. So not only do our students need the definition, but sometimes adults like myself need to know it as well. So just like we would teach any lesson with the I do, we do, you do model, we would want to make sure that we are explicitly acknowledging student strengths and where the students, we want to meet them where they're at. We want to provide a rationale on why certain behaviors are necessary in school settings, and we want to build fluency through practice so that we can provide reinforcement when we are seeing the skill that we want to see repeated, and we want to give some corrective feedback if we need to change that in some way. So the first thing in the lesson plan is, and you'll see this is an example lesson plan, which will be linked later on to the horseplay example that we talked about in the first part with faculty commitment. So the first thing this school did, they defined what horseplay was, and they tied it back to those school-wide expectations of being safe and being respectful. Then they defined what that would look like. Students are going to keep their hands and feet to themselves. They'll move safely. They'll respect personal space. They will stop any physical interaction immediately when asked. The second step is providing that rationale as for why it's important, modeling and demonstrating. Why is it important? Well, I know in my junior high, horseplay never escalated. So we want to make sure that we want to keep it that way. What could start as a joke could end up in being too rough or could end up with hurt feelings. And so it could very quickly escalate into an unsafe situation or where injuries could occur. So we want to make sure that we're explaining to our students why it's important. The trick to this is that when it is a universal lesson being pushed out for teachers to teach, we're also getting teachers on the same page. We've gotten your feedback. Now we're defining it for all of us, and you're teaching it so the students aren't just hearing it from Miss Gomez and think that's Miss Gomez's example, but they know it's Miss Stewart's definition. They know it's Miss Kowalski's definition. Then the next thing we are going to do is provide some of those examples and non-examples. Notice we took some of those things from staff feedback of, okay, what's going to be classroom managed and what's going to be office managed. Maybe here's where we bring in some of those examples for students, where we explain for our students, this is an example, this is a non-example. And we do have some linked lesson plan examples for you on the bottom left-hand side there, which I know those have been posted in the chat throughout. On the next screen, you'll see step 4, which is that guided practice. We did the I do where I defined it. I gave you some examples, some non-examples. I gave you the rationale. Now we're getting to the we do, where we have teacher directions at the top. In this particular lesson plan, we have scenarios where students could hear the example that includes horseplay, and then they hear a second example that includes respectful behavior. Then we have student discussion questions, and they're at each point of the lesson, there are choices for teachers. If we want to expand it out, we can ask more discussion questions. If we want to, maybe we're short on time, maybe we only ask 1 or 2 questions versus all of the discussion. Maybe we do think peer share versus whole group discussion. But then we also have a closing for the lesson as well. We want to make sure that every teacher teaching this lesson indicates and highlights these specific points at the bottom there. Accidents happen. It's how you respond that matters. Choosing respectful behavior keeps everyone safe and comfortable. So it's tying it again. Those highlights, we're pulling the lesson to a close, but we're also still tying it back to those school-wide expectations. Then we have to see students practice, and we're going to give them the opportunities for practice. We're going to provide that behavior specific praise when we see the behavior that we want to see replicated, and we're going to provide corrective feedback if necessary. But some of those explicit opportunities for practice will be, maybe we have a need based on data for more weekly scenarios, more examples. Maybe we have an open-ended lesson with students where students give more examples and they're not teacher provided, but they're student provided. We also want to publicly recognize our students with the reinforcer when we are seeing the skill that we want to see replicated. And we want to make sure that all of our adults on campus are also regularly modeling respectful behavior as well. Hopefully that would be a little easier with horseplay. We don't want our adults engaging.
One would hope.
One would hope.
One
It's
would
not a
hope.
given.
No.
From there, the next part would be, now we've taught the lesson, we want to make sure that we're monitoring the data, we're adjusting, we are reteaching. In that data will show us if we need the more scenarios or if we need to teach it in a different way. Maybe there are pockets on campus where maybe specific grade levels are having more issues with horseplay. So we do a second lesson in that grade level, and we differentiate based on that student need. Here we have 3 sample lessons because I am a firm believer that you should not have to reinvent the wheel. So if there is a template that works for you and your school PBIS team, I strongly encourage to click on these links, delete our information and put your information in there. Don't struggle or spend time creating a template when there are a minimum of 4 templates that you can see right here that should work for really any lesson that you have. And making sure that we are developing the logistics of how these lessons will be shared. Initial instruction, making sure that we are logistically scheduling and planning out every homeroom every Monday is going to teach the lesson that is provided. We are going to make sure that every teacher teaching the lesson, every adult teaching the lesson has the supplies that they need to appropriately teach. We're going to make sure that we are ongoing getting the data that we share with our staff to tie it back into our staff commitment. Hey, we taught this lesson. Here's how it's going. What are you seeing? What do you need to share with us? How can we tie it into assemblies? How can we tie it into our school socials? How can we tie it into morning announcements, or if we have an in-house news program? How can our civics teacher bring it into the civics classroom? How can language arts bring it into reading? There are so many things that can be done, but the logistics need to be planned out by someone. We also having I currently live in a very military heavy area, so we constantly get new students or new staff. How are we going to orient them so that we're not just doing it the first week in August and the first week in January? How can we have those ongoing lessons? And on the next slide,
Well, and I
we
would also
see,
make sure, oh, sorry, Christy, I want to say too, just
yeah,
substitute teachers or guest teachers,
yes.
right? Making sure they're informed and there's something that's communicated with them when they're a guest on your campus too.
Yes, very important. Here we have, this is a sample lesson schedule that, again, not reinventing the wheel. I'm pretty sure I stole this from Kat. That
Mhm.
this is a sample lesson schedule. And what I absolutely love about this is that you can see that semester two is a repeat of the semester one lessons. I will say any lesson schedule should be a living, breathing document based on data. So, for example, if we teach our basic behavior expectations in week one and we see a hotspot pop up in October when the honeymoon is over, then based on data, we should adjust our schedule. So, this is just one example of how you don't need to go into the year with a year's worth of lessons. You can be a little bit ahead, chapter ahead of the kid. And in the chat, if you could share with us what behaviors are you seeing at your campus or in your district since returning from break? What's your current behavioral focus? Are you reteaching? Are you seeing new things pop up? So in the chat box, or if you'd like to unmute and share, please do so now.
So we are currently using our wait strategy, just giving people time to think and curate your ideas. Yes, cell phone violations. Yes, very common.
They've been on break and been on those little screens all the whole time.
Getting reacclimated to the school environment. Yes. Horseplay in middle school, and just reviewing overall expectations in elementary, especially hallways, going to specials and transitions. Thank you so much for sharing.
I was just going to chime in to piggyback on what Christy was saying, that using your sample lesson schedule here and kind of looking at your data and seeing what are some of those behavioral expectations that we might need to prioritize reviewing based off of our data is a nice way to make that a fluid document.
And what's also helpful is
Absolutely.
if you have a plan and these lessons already created, you might need to move like the bus safety lessons up. Maybe you're noticing a lot of bus referrals in October where, we have them scheduled for November, but we could certainly move them up if needed, or playground reminders. You're starting with a plan, so at least you have something to go by, but these plans will change based on the student responses.
Absolutely. And an important part to point out too is obviously I use civics examples because I was a civics teacher, I was a history teacher. And this is your scope and sequence, just like we have a scope and sequence for our standards in our academic classes. This would be our scope and sequence for our behavior common standards as well. Making sure that we are and can't bring it back to data enough, like Brooke was saying, making sure that we are aware of when breaks are, making sure that we are aware of There's not going to be a lesson because of a 3-day week, such as week 10, as you see on the chat there. But making sure that our instruction is based around what the data is telling us. Was there
And
anything else in the chat?
I see,
Yes. Mhm.
oh, go ahead, Sabrina.
Sorry, I see that again, injuries at recess, which would, of course, be a safety concern. So we want to prioritize what we put in place to address things like injuries at recess in elementary due to not following rules. So the opportunity to go back and do the reteach, and then again. To promote consistency with teachers and their expectations that are provided. And then Beth also highlighted office discipline referrals for unsafe acts. So again, that to me would be a prompt for us to revisit that, because safety is always a priority, and there it sounds like there might be an opportunity to operationalize what's broadly communicated in the code of conduct. So making sure that it's really defined in clear terms that are observable and measurable. And then Stephen also identified expectations for the restroom, which restrooms are always a challenge because we can't actively supervise in most cases. And so we rely on student reporting. And so again, maybe revisiting that and again, clearly defining those expectations, but also encouraging, especially in elementary, reporting versus tattling. So in an area like restrooms, it's not tattling if they're letting us know that there's a problem, and encouraging them to report based on the possible safety concerns.
And then I was just going to say, I think Beth's comment here with this offense of unsafe acts is a perfect example of kind of everything that we're talking about that your Tier 1 PBIS teams can help work through as a school campus. Every district is going to have at least one of these, right? Inappropriate behavior, right? That's a common one that districts use. Well, what does that mean, right? So the district gives you this broadly defined definition in the code of conduct. So your Tier 1 team can then take this to your staff, right? Have on a professional learning day or in a faculty meeting, okay, we want to make our own view of what does inappropriate behavior or unsafe acts look like. The staff communicates, helps you to come up with one definition we're all going to go by, and then you can create the lesson plans to support the teaching of that at your campus.
And Lauren, just to kind of, before we move to the next slide, just to make sure that we are saying that to use our own example of what this is creating that universal lesson. What it is not is saying on our campus, everyone is going to teach safe behaviors, because then you get as many lessons as you get adults that are giving the lessons. So we want to make sure that we are using consistent language. We are using consistent definitions. We're using consistent examples and non-examples, and we are using consistent reinforcers as we are seeing those skills on campus.
Right, and that is a big lift of the PBIS team, because we don't want to just be handing the teachers the requirement of coming up with their own. Like, all right, third grade, we'll make a lesson plan. Right. Because then it becomes one more thing for the third grade teachers. And then third grade might be doing something different than second grade. So the PBIS team comes up with that universal lesson plan, and then that's what's shared out. So all the teachers are communicating the same message, and then they're not having to come up with the lessons themselves. So when you put it all together, right, we're going to show you an example of something that a high school did that followed this whole problem-solving system, including their faculty and staff, and then creating targeted lessons to work through tardies specifically. So they noticed in their starting data that they had 302 office discipline referrals for excessive tardies. So they looked at that and said, okay, well, one of our school-wide expectations is that we are responsible. Well, if we're responsible, that means that we're going to be on time. During a staff meeting, they came up with what does it mean to be on time across all staff and students. And teaching secondary, I was in 7th grade. To me, on time was you were in the door before I shut the door when the bell rang. To the teacher across the hall, on time was simply that they could see them in the hallway when the bell rang. So we had to clarify that, and schools have to clarify those types of perceptions so that we all have the same message. So teachers agreed, what the definition is. We agreed that we're going to meet students in the door. We agreed the rule is going to be 2 feet in the door when the bell rings. And then there were immediate consequences that were consistently implemented and handed out across the school. They did also increase supervision in the common areas to kind of shuffle the kids along, right? Like, come on, guys, bell's gonna ring. Don't forget, you need 2 feet in the door.
Walk and talk,
right?
walk and talk.
Right? Otherwise, you're getting a pink slip, not a pink slip, but you know what I mean, whatever it might be, so shuffling them along. So the PBIS team created the full lesson, 2 feet in the door. It was taught across campus. It was retaught as needed, and it was consistently reinforced when the students were arriving on time. What the school noticed is that after 1 year with this focused instruction, they only had 59 office discipline referrals for excessive tardies. So to go from 302 to 59 is a pretty good return on investment, I guess, for creating this lesson plan and getting the staff on board. So as we wrap up today for our intentional close, we want you to think of something that you can potentially do now, and then maybe something a little later. So what's one action step that you're going to implement soon, right away? Or what's something that maybe you want to bring back to your PBIS team as an idea? Maybe you want to start looking at data, maybe you want to be sharing the data. And then what's something that you're going to work on implementing down the road for later? So if you could either just unmute yourself or go ahead and type that in the chat.
And this could be across all three of the topics we covered today: faculty commitment, classroom systems, or lesson plans for teaching behavior.
Yeah, good point. Maybe there was a good recognition piece that you heard for staff that you want to include. So I see some coming in already. So now being better at sharing data with staff, talking with the PBIS team and admin about developing teacher shout outs. I love that, Beth. So taking that idea of unsafe acts and starting to define it for your school. And then designing the lesson plans long term. Yeah, that might be a summer project, right, for the PBIS team.
Carrie from Highlands said that now she's going to share attendance breakdown idea with principals to help highlight the impact on education.
And Betsy, I believe we do we have a little thank you. I was like, I think we have a little survey. If you could just please.
Sorry, I'm just reading the chat suggestions, the now and laters. They're so good.
I was just afraid I was going to close and forget to mention that.
So I did just open the poll. This is just to give us feedback on today's chat, letting us know what you thought. This really helps us with our planning. We use this data to plan our future chats. So if you could fill it out, we would really appreciate it. And that hour went by so fast. Thank you guys so much.
So
that
fast.
was such a great chat. I really appreciated it. And I love the examples that you shared.
And thank you to everyone, not only for joining us, but for participating and answering in the chat. And then I have our little friendly there to wish you all a good day. So I think, Betsy, the poll's still open, right? If you're still working on it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
Just to see a couple people still filling it out.
Perfect. And thank you all again so much for attending today.